somewhat unfair.
I think you have a particular thing you really want to talk about and you're asking me other questions, but I don't think it's unfair to ask me about the audit. It's absolutely the case that the United States military should be able to pass an audit, and we've got to be on that pathway to get there.
Do you think the military should be able to tell us where their ridiculous budget is going? Because apparently they can't do that.
And
okay, I mean, good journalism does uncover corruption, but I'm not sure these two things are linked. An audit is not.
But they are.
Okay, so you need to explain to me, do you understand what an audit does and the degree to which it is linked to the question that you're asking?
I believe so.
Okay, go ahead. Give me your explanation.
No, I don't mind learning. So what I would suggest is that the audit that they have in the military doesn't really look at whether or not there's efficacy. It's just whether they got delivered the thing that they ordered. And
that is any audit. That is any audit. That is true.
But generally, those audits aren't $400 billion for Raytheon and $1.7 trillion for a plane that doesn't seem to be doing. Like, there is a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse within a system.
Audits and waste, fraud, and abuse are not the same thing. So let's decompose these pieces
please educate me on
Sure.
What
so an
the
audit is
difference
exactly what you just described, which is, do I know what was delivered to which place?
Right.
The ability to pass an audit or the fact that the DoD has not passed an audit is not suggestive of waste, fraud, and abuse.
So this clip with Jon Stewart on C-SPAN is absolutely amazing because it reveals something that is really just absolutely absurd, because we spend literally billions upon billions of dollars on our military budget, with a huge chunk of that going to these huge defense contractors, and all part of this large-scale operation of military imperialism around the globe. And the unfortunate reality is that they have failed an audit. And what makes that ridiculous spending even more wild is the simple fact that they have failed an audit, which they explain just means that they can't tell us where exactly all the money is going. But isn't that a problem? Now, they seem to say, oh, well, that's not necessarily indicative of fraud, waste, or abuse. But as Jon Stewart points out, I think if they can't tell us where the money's going, they can't say whether or not it is fraud, waste, or abuse. And then on top of that, we just have to take a look at how contracting works within the military and how all of these operations work anyway within the military, because at the end of the day, military projects are expensive on purpose. They are needlessly expensive. And part of the reason why they are needlessly expensive is so that these giant contractors can make a ton of money, and so that companies like Raytheon and Lockheed Martin can just rake in cash as the United States runs around selling weapons around the world, runs around bombing different countries around the world, sending fleets of ships and airplanes all over the place. All of those types of things generate profits for these companies. And anytime there's some sort of huge military operation or expenditure on some sort of new fancy technology, you have all of these different companies who are just begging for these contracts to develop those technologies at a very, very high premium. Very often needlessly higher than anything that would be purchased in the private market. And the reason for that is very simple. It's that, in effect, military spending is a direct subsidization of the technology sector, and that the United States has for a very long time used military spending as basically a giant corporate handout. And that can range from defense-specific companies like Lockheed Martin or Raytheon, but it can also extend to companies like Google or Microsoft and things like that. And what's so shameless about this is not only the fact that all of this war and violence is just so unbelievably needless and causes extreme harm around the world, but also the simple fact that they dare to spit in our faces and say that the military budget constantly has to go up, despite the fact that they quite literally cannot tell us where the money is even really going. They say, oh, just because they failed an audit doesn't necessarily mean there's anything malicious happening, except for, I think we should all recognize that the very military in and of itself, the fact that it nearly is $1 trillion budget that we are spending on war, is in and of itself a absolute travesty and a robbery of the American public, and in a lot of ways a robbery of the world, because a large part of what our military does is impose our economic agenda on countries around the world, which means that people are forced into poverty as a result of our wars that we wage against them, so that giant companies can make a profit and exploit workers who are put in an incredibly vulnerable position by the United States imperialism.